Hello and welcome all to the Digital Economy Reloaded, AI Solutions and National Security. My name is Angelica Sorotin, Gen Z digitalization expert and executive producer and co-host of the Digital Pioneers Dialogue podcast. Alongside me is my podcast co-host and AI expert, Mark Midovich, as well as our partner, Bootstrap Labs, who is represented by Nikolai Weisdrum. Together, Mark Midovich and I will moderate today's discussion with specific intervention from Bootstrap Labs, in which we are honored to present the following guests who join us on screen. The Honorable Deborah Vin Smith, CEO of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, the Honorable Deemah Al-Yahya, founder and CEO of WomenSpark, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Mark Beale, Head of Strategy and Policy at the DoDs Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, Matthew Tarascio, Vice President of AI at Lockheed Martin, Iraqi Baridze, Head of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the UN UNICRI, Erin, Director of Cyber Risk Analytics at Guidewire-Cyence, and Chris Novak, Director of the Verizon Threat Research. So welcome all to today's dialogue, and before we dive into today's series on national security and AI, I will provide the overview of our dialogue for our audience, and my co-host Mark will address all of our panelists and highlight their biographies. The onset of coronavirus quickly and effectively crippled the structural integrity of governmental systems across the globe, exposing national systems and throwing public and private institutions into a cloud of confusion. Nations are only just beginning to crawl out of this chaos, which has proven the need for stronger national security protocols and solutions to deal with extreme events like pandemics. Governments have largely been looking towards AI-powered solutions, meaning that they need for responsible and ethical AI implementations have never been better and greater than ever before. In this episode of the series, we will take a deeper dive into the issue of national security and the need for responsible and ethical AI solutions, as well as current solutions that are in store to ease the strain caused by COVID-19. With this in mind, I will now pass the mic on to Mark to expand upon the incredible backgrounds of all of the panelists who join us here today.
Thank you very much, Angelica. It is a tremendous program that we have here on National Security AI. We're very honored to have all of the esteemed colleagues and participants around the world and around the United States. I'm very excited because at this time, one of the big issues that we need to address is national security. How do we protect ourselves? How do we protect our friends, our colleagues during the time of COVID-19? And how can AI be a catalyst for good around the United States and the world in tackling some of the most toughest challenges in the United States and globally? And with this in mind, it gives me a great privilege to introduce some esteemed colleagues here. Deemah Al-Yahya is the founder and CEO of WomenSpark of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Deemah is the tech pioneer and the digital economy expert and was appointed as the Microsoft first Saudi female senior executive, leading developer experience and digital innovation. Deemah is an innovation and digital economy advisor to the governments and private sector. Deemah has been instrumental in the National Digital Transformation Strategy as the Secretary General and Chief Executive Officer of the National Digital Transformation Ministerial Committee. Her effort in that domain led her to be awarded as the Digital CEO of the year 2018. She has also led G20 Digital Economy Task Force for Saudi Arabia, in China, in Germany, and Argentina. There's a number of several boards, including Mint Science Museum Board, the Saudi Arabian Federation for Cybersecurity, Programming and Drones, the World Economic Forum Digital Economy Global Future Council Network, member of the World Economic Forum, as well as MIT REAP member. Very committed to the Saudi female empowerment. Deemah manages to launch and lead several initiatives enabling women in STEM and enhancing their skills to meet the highest standards of the Saudi labor markets, which is what led her to establish the WomenSpark initiative. Our next guest is Iraqi Baridza. Irakli is the head of the Center of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at UNICRI at the United Nations in Netherlands. More than 20 years of experience in leading multilateral negotiations, developing stakeholder engagement, programs with governments, UN agencies, international organizations, private industry and corporations, think tanks, civil society, foundations, academia, and other partners on international level. Mark Beale is the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center's Chief of Strategic Engagement and Policy for Department of Defense. In this role, Mark leads JAIC technical policy, strategy, and communications, international and interagency affairs, and industry and academic outreach. Prior to this, Mr. Beale served in a number of regional and functional roles in the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, focusing on the Middle East and South Asia, homeland defense, security cooperation, and counterterrorism. Matt Tarascio. Matt is serving as the Vice President of Artificial Intelligence for Lockheed Martin. In his role, Matt provides the leadership and strategy to help position Lockheed Martin as the leader in artificial intelligence. Prior to the current role, Matt served as the first Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Lockheed Martin. Tarascio, Lockheed Martin started in 2003 and has held positions of increasing responsibility throughout innovation, engineering, programs, and strategy departments, functions, and organizations for the whole enterprise. Christopher Novak is the Global Director of Verizon's Threat Research Advisory Center at Verizon's business. He's internationally recognized expert in the field of incident response, computer forensics, and threat intelligence. He has been involved with cybersecurity for over 20 years. Christopher has assisted corporations, government, in all matters related to digital forensics, fraud investigations, crisis management. He has testified as an expert witness in various matters and before such bodies as the Supreme Court of the State of New York. He also briefed the United States congressional committees, such as Senate Banking, House Financial Services, Senate Commerce, House Energy, Commerce, and Judiciary, Homeland Security. We also are privileged to have Erin Kenneally. Erin is Director of Cyber Analytics at Guidewire company, where she provides strategic advisement for data-driven research initiatives, risk analytics, and modeling technology solutions. She's most recently transitioned to this role from portfolio manager in the cybersecurity division of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate. Honorable Deborah Vin Smith is the president and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness in Washington, D.C., which many of you know is the nonpartisan leadership coalition of CEOs, university presidents, union leaders, and national laboratory directors, all committed to developing policy solutions and national initiatives to drive future productivity, prosperity for all Americans, and the global success of American enterprises and businesses. Deborah has more than 20 years of experience as a senior U.S. government official. She has worked at the Department of Commerce in administration of President George H.W. Bush and an assistant director of international affairs in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Reagan administration. She served as a Senate confirmed member of the Oversight Board of the Internal Revenue Service in administrations of President George W. Bush and President Barack H. Obama. There's a lot more to tell about Deborah and her accomplishments and her purpose and belief that we need to really excel on innovation and competitiveness for the United States and the whole world. Thank you, Deborah, for joining us. Now, very quickly to go to Nikolai to give us some opening remarks from the heart of technology around the world, Silicon Valley, and also a little bit about Sweden. Maybe not so much, but more on Silicon Valley. And here you are, Nikolai, please.
Thank you, Mark. So first, I would like to just talk a little bit about the role both Silicon Valley plays in the world and in innovation, especially at times like this, and I think of venture capital. So if we look historically, I think Silicon Valley has been this incredible place where the critical mass of skills has come together to solve some of the hardest problems. And this has been going on since the Second World War, where some of the core technologies that actually allowed the Allied to win the war, actually some of those things came out of the Bay Area. And I think, you know, something for discussion later in the session is a little bit about maybe both the controversy and maybe the importance of Silicon Valley's engagement with some of these serious issues in national security and other things, right? I think the key thing here, we're standing in front of this pandemic And the role of AI has emerged as this new disruptive tool that we see is really impacting every single industry, every part of society. And I think what we're seeing is that in Silicon Valley and around the venture capital community, a lot of the ways to go from research to figure out how to apply this and scale this and make this available to society is happening in the Bay Area. And I think we've seen that. I think the Bay Area is driving a very clear leadership when it comes to AI. Around these new challenges around COVID-19, I think it's also very exciting that we've seen the quick mobilization around a number of efforts and companies in the Bay Area that has been rallied around to quickly find solutions to everything from testing to treatment methods and so forth. And we even have some of our portfolio companies in the AI space, and there's a number of others that have been able to actually, through purely data-driven and AI models, find ways to deduce possible treatments for COVID-19 in a very fast-paced manner. So this is very exciting, and I think that plays a very important role in dealing with big challenges like this.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. I want to go directly to Deborah Vin Smith. She just delivered a powerful testimony yesterday, congressional testimony, talks about the innovation the innovation and discussion about the national commission that she and a number of high-profile chairs, co-chairs have set up in the United States to focus on competitiveness and innovation, prosperity in United States. And wanted to hear from you, Deborah, your opening remarks and maybe a little bit about what was said yesterday to the House Committee on Budget, sharing many other things, but especially important, the U.S. share of the global R&D that has fallen and what we need to do to get back into the game. How do we leverage all of this AI investment in the national security and other areas? So, and give us an introduction and some powerful remarks about what you said yesterday and really direction of where we need to go on innovation and competitiveness globally.
Thank you, Mark, for your leadership and all you are doing, leading digital pioneers and being a senior fellow of the Council on Competitiveness. Let me just start by saying that the fundamental role of emerging technologies and how they have been applied in industry, in our social life, as well as a linchpin of national security, have been the foundation of America's economic leadership and national security strength throughout the 20th century. And this is only accelerated and becomes more critical with the recognition that all these critical emerging technologies, obviously the digital revolution, but biotechnology, the nanotechnology, cognitive revolutions, are all really fused with military applications and profound applications and transformation about how we will live, work, everything in human life. And the speed at which this is occurring, this civil military fusion, and I purposely use that word, concept, even though I'm not so keen on it, since it's the cornerstone of President Xi's strategy to lead and dominate these technologies, is more important than ever because of the rapidity and the scale and scope of the capabilities. And the Council has been working on the linkages from innovation or R&D investments and their commercialization for over 35 years. We know we traversed a very complex time some years ago with Japan, and we rebounded with very strong productivity and the innovation, the startup world, the dynamic clusters of innovation, Silicon Valley and others, that propelled us back into leadership. But today we are really facing a new challenge, and I think that AI, deep machine learning, is perhaps really at the centerfold of this, because as many leaders around the world have said, whoever leads in the development, but importantly, the applications of AI and deep machine learning will have global dominance. And we know, of course, it's impacting every dimension of economic activity. And we just heard, about the very exciting use of AI deep machine learning in the rapidity in which we have over 300 potential therapies and a number of vaccines in trial now, including, of course, Moderna and others in the United States. So AI is not just making the merger of the physical and virtual world more intelligent, it's making it proactive. And this, of course, it's giving it almost life, and this sentient life. And this is, of course, the frontier, but again, it has profound implications as we compete in a multipolar science and technology world, where in 1960, the United States dominated technology due to the size of our investment, 69% of global R&D. But now that share has dropped to 28%, and China's is 26%. And as I have said, China in particular, but also other countries, but China we really have to signal out, has set its sights on world leadership in technology with rich and illicit campaigns to achieve this goal, and it's pursuing aggressive plans to dominate and AI in particular. And I have said this publicly, that what is going on in Western China with the Uyghurs is a test bed, a living test bed, combining the data on genomics, on health, and with all the IA tools, including visualization, pattern recognition, in the population of the Uyghurs for what I would call digital control and authoritarianism. And there's no place in the world that is doing such a thing, let alone in a test bed, but in such a scale. And of course, now in the United States and other parts of the world, we're rightly concerned about the civil liberty, the racial equity, inclusion issues about the AI algorithms and how they can and have already been applied in ways that are not necessarily in the interest of a free, democratic society. You all probably know the spending that's going on in AI, so I don't perhaps need to give you that data, but I do have it if we want to add it. But what really was important yesterday in the hearing of the House Budget Committee is a recognition that yes, the United States has to maintain its leadership and investment in R&D and keep up the pace of that. We have declined significantly over the years. But very importantly, we need a new game plan for the 21st century. We can't just be doing the research and development. We have to be able to commercialize rapidly and at scale. And this means knitting together in a new construct the work at our world-class universities, very importantly, our national labs. These are national global treasures. No country in the world has this capability. And with our large-scale companies and our vibrant startup economy. And we also have to do this in a way that focuses on the technology platforms, AI obviously being one, but also, of course, beyond exascale computing, quantum computing, the next revolutions in genomics, advanced materials. And the one I will say that in my view, and in which the Council on Competitiveness in partnership with our government, Department of Energy, NSF, DoD, and our members in the United States, we have to lead in the discovery, but very importantly, the development and manufacturing in the United States of next generation microelectronics. If we lose that, all of the platforms of the digitization that has rapidly increased and enabled us to function through the COVID virus era will be in the control of China. And this is, in my view, the highest national security issue that we must face. And what's very daunting about this is because of our capital cost structure and the way capital has been allocated in the United States from the private sector, but also from the government, we do not have the resources right now to deal with the disintegration of our supply chains in advanced microelectronics. That's true, of course, as we learned in COVID. Who would have ever thought that so much of the global supply chain in feedstocks, in pharmaceuticals, and devices, and PPE was all hollowed out, and we were dependent on China and other countries for this. So it's not just to lead in discovery and research and rely on startups for next generation microelectronics. If a venture capitalist was looking at Intel today as an investment, I would posit they would walk away. It's not a software-driven app. And so we have to have a new game plan. And Mark, you really educated me on this some years ago. We have trillions of dollars sitting in hedge funds in Greenwich, Connecticut. They are not investing in anything that matters in the infrastructure at scale for the future. And so these things all came out in the hearing yesterday, and very importantly also the power and potential of people. And we want to maintain the openness of our research environment, but we can't have a situation where Chinese investors hide behind venture capital funds, where the best and brightest students admitted into our elite universities are predominantly from outside our country. We have to educate and enable the lower third of our population to be fully engaged. And we have to also create new hubs of innovation, new centers of innovation linked with our universities, labs, community colleges, and a vibrant economy. And one example I'll close with is what's going on in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which of course is one of our great national laboratories. They have abundant land, they have clean energy power, they have brilliant people, and they have industry and a government committed to make this area a 21st century innovation hub in advanced materials, additive manufacturing, high performance computing and everything. And let's just think, 5 years out, that may be as significant a place as others in the country. So I will stop there, but I want to highlight on the AI challenge. This is something that requires us to knit together all our assets that we have in this country and do so at scale and speed. And the tools that we have used in the past will not get us to where we need to be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Those were very powerful remarks and overview of where this country is and where it needs to go in the future regarding our national security, our supply chains, how we are fighting COVID-19, and really the leverage of artificial intelligence in our industries, in our society, and our national security. And with this in mind, I think it's a perfect transition right now from Deborah Vin Smith, a perfect transition to go to Mark Beale from the U.S. Department of Defense. Mark Beale, as I mentioned, has been a key advocate for artificial intelligence in the U.S. government and Department of Defense. As mentioned, Mark Beale was in the office of also Secretary of Defense Policy Office prior to this, focused on issues of the Middle East, and has been involved in domestic preparedness, response strategies, capabilities, dealing with naturally occurring disease outbreaks and biological weapon attacks. What we are facing now, or similar what we're facing now, you have committed your life to the service of this country, and we thank you for this, Mark. But we also would like to get some moments from you, memorable moments that would be useful for our audience. We have the audience which will go out is not only venture capitalists or CEOs, but it's going to go out to the Gen Z community, the younger community in the United States and the world. So your memorable moments and experiences would be very interesting. Then to you, Mark.
Great. Hey, thanks, Mark, and thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to share with you what's going on in the Department of Defense. I guess to cut right to the point, you know, I think I'll betray my age. I think I'm the only millennial on the senior management team in the Joint AI Center, and it's a fact I'm very proud of. Just a couple of like illustrative moments in my career that kind of crystallized why I do what I do. The first is that I was a senior in high school on 9/11, and that obviously completely changed the trajectory of my life. I had planned to be an aerospace engineer, and I was going down that path. And then I made this sort of sudden pivot into national service. And so I got the chance to work as a civilian in support of the U.S. Army and deployed to Afghanistan. I got to see combat operations firsthand, the difficulties that our forces are faced when they're thrust in these very complex situations without necessarily the tools and always the training necessary to be successful underscored for me the importance to make sure these warfighters have the best technology at our disposal in their hands when they're in these very difficult situations. And then through my career, I've worked in a number of different positions. Way back in 2012, I helped the Department of Defense support the national response to a sort of a smaller version of what's going on now with COVID-19. This was avian influenza H7N9. That was another outbreak from China, and the world kind of responded in that sense. And in many cases, that was a sort of very instructive a model by which the government, I think, over time evolved its planning and operations to deal with these kinds of crises. To flash forward now, so I was about employee number 6 of the Joint AI Center. My previous boss, Lieutenant General Shanahan, he's now retired. Boss, if you're watching, I hope you won't judge me too harshly. He asked me to stay on and lead up this strategy and policy directorate, and I've been building the team ever since. Nothing like a crisis that kind of really focuses attention. And I will say the Joint AI Center got in this game very quickly in terms of the response to COVID. So what we did was we had this idea about supply chain predictive analytics. And we had a user, our U.S. Northern Command, who was supporting the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA in the national response. And we sort of sketched out very quickly in the back of a napkin. And for DoD, this is remarkable. We went from concept to code in about a week. Wow. And now we have an MVP that's been deployed on the NORTHCOM common operational picture, and we're figuring out how to, as a platform tool, how to scale it. And it's a remarkable story for me. Just so going from where I was in Afghanistan as a young person, watching sort of the underwhelming digital tools that we had, till today where we're concept to code in a week. It's just a remarkable place to be in DoD. DoD is in the midst of this sort of digital transformation. And it's very interesting. On one hand, AI adoption at scale in DoD is brand new and very, very difficult. But on the other hand, DoD and its agencies like DARPA have been prime movers in AI technologies going back decades, in the 1960s. Wow. And I would even argue we were seed investors in Silicon Valley. Yeah. That helps spur this entire innovation ecosystem. So I'll stop there. That's my introductory pitch. I hope I answered your question.
And Mark, I will also say that it's incredible, when we were reading, incredible that you now have more than 200 employees, a huge budget, a focus, clear deliverables, use cases. You know, it also tells us when you set your mind and you have a purpose, you could get it done. And we really thank you for this great initiative that you're with your colleagues that you're spearheading. Thank you. And with this, I would like to go now to across the world, and I'd like to go to Deemah, that is joining us from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Not only that, I would like to ask you to give us your perspective on artificial intelligence and national security from the lenses of the Middle East and the world, but I would like to also direct the question in that opening. My question would be, you are leading an incredible community of women and young leaders, and you're also are very much focused on discussing the Vision 2030, a powerful vision set out by your leadership in the kingdom. If you could talk about where that vision connects with artificial intelligence, with the innovation economy that Deborah mentioned, and get an opening statement from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the opportunity for me to share this great conversation with all of you and to get to know all of the great leaders on the call. Very thrilled to be here from across the ocean from Saudi Arabia, and to give me an opportunity to talk about the great changes that is happening now. So as you mentioned, Mark, the Vision 2030, since it started from 2015, it has been recognized and considered that digital is going to be a pillar in the transformation of the country. And with all the resources that Saudi has, it has a very great opportunity to lead in the digital space in the region. And why is that? Is because
Deemah, I would just venture to say say that I was there, my first visit at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the G20 and B20 meetings that have occurred in January when we were actually able to travel. What an impressive transformation, really a most impressive transformation I have ever seen.
Well, thank you so much. But as I've always said, we have always been that advanced, open, but we haven't been commercializing ourselves or communicating the right way. But looking at Saudi from a geographical perspective, we connect three continents together, which gives it a very unique positioning in terms of the trade of data or technology and so on. Second, we see Saudi is a very young population where 75% of our population is under the age of 35. So very young, very tech savvy, and we have quick adoption to digital technology. We look from the other side is economically. Saudi is one of the countries in the G20 and also very determined to increase that growth and to become part of the G7, depending on the digital economy and recognizing that data is the future oil. And therefore, and because of that, we have set a strategy for digital transformation that is aligned with our digital with our Vision 2030. And that digital strategy was mainly built on three main pillars. First is the digital infrastructure, which is connectivity, data, and human capital. We have more than 57% of Saudi is connected through fiber optics, and the rest connected via 4G, UHVs, and we're looking at satellites right now and making sure that all remote areas are connected. Human capital, we have been investing heavily in youth to train and either from an expert perspective, IT professionals, or even the public. We go to data as well, and we look at because of that importance that we believe in the digital economy of the future, established a new authority called the Authority of Data and Artificial Intelligence. And the main objective of this authority is to look at the policies, regulations that would help to not only commercialize data, but also to use data in efficiency and in future planning and innovation. And that's when it comes to the infrastructure. And then we look at digital economy, where we see we have created blueprints of, and that's the time when I was the Secretary General of the digital transformation, blueprints for digital healthcare, digital education, smart city, e-commerce, and also Hajj and Umrah, which is our biggest, let's say, tourism economical income or revenue for Saudi Arabia. And when we created these blueprints 5 years ago, it was tested with COVID-19. So it was very easy transition for us to move to working remotely. Telemedicine was very easy to establish in remote areas, and also digital education as well. So all of that effort that has been done throughout these 5 years, we are now seeing that impact. Although there is areas of improvement, definitely, we're not there yet, but it showed how we were planning in the right way, in the right direction. When we look at the last thing, which is a digital nation, and we made sure that we wanted to create a generation that are innovative by default and organically adopting digital innovation. And therefore, we have established two government funds that are providing grants and providing capital for startups and great ideas, and scaling these ideas to become unicorns and gazelles, hopefully. Also, the capital market has been giving out, or let's say making it flexible to create VCs and venture capitals, and we see that increase in Saudi. Not only that, but also establishing accelerator programs, partnering with big accelerators in Silicon Valley, like the Y Combinator, 500 startups, and others. Techstars, we have a hackathon next week with the Ministry of Education. So that stimulation of innovation and thinking outside the box is very important for us. But also, we believe that we cannot do it alone. And here is where we are investing heavily in bringing nations together, and we're providing the infrastructure for all great minds of the world, for them to find Saudi as a test bed and a place for them to innovate and come up with great solutions for the world.
Thank you very much, Deemah. I'm sure there's a lot of other stories to talk about the Saudi Arabia and its accomplishments in the digital stage, and we'll get to it hopefully in some questions. But from this point and this junction on the global level of digitalization, I would like to jump now to my colleague, Irakli. And Irakli, if you can provide us an overview of where you see the issues are at the United Nations, at the UNICRI, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the interesting use cases that you're seeing on facial recognition and surveillance now around the world. Maybe a little bit about the vision in your opening, the vision where you just recently mentioned, I believe, your vision of the world where crimes are prevented, are investigated, are prosecuted, offenders are deterred, they're rehabilitated through the criminal justice system, more effectively and more efficiently through the use of artificial intelligence, robotics, and related new technologies, in a manner that would not erode, in your own words, human rights, deepen inequality, or exacerbate discrimination. How could we implement this vision, Irakli?
Mark, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And first of all, thanks for inviting. And it's always a pleasure to work with you. And thank you for your leadership in this field with the AI pioneers and with all the activities you are doing. Thank you for introducing my vision, which is actually part of our vision of the strategy of the center, which I'm heading at the United Nations and UNICRI Center for AI and Robotics. And not only that, but what we also see is that with a strong emphasis on the lawful and human rights compliant use of these technologies, the public will trust both the criminal justice system and the technology that it applies to safeguard them. At the same time, authorities are also aware of and are better prepared to prevent and respond to the possible malicious use of these technologies for criminals or terrorist purposes. Well, that's a vision. That's the world we are working to achieve, and how to do it. It's a difficult part, obviously, and that was sort of with that in mind. That's why we created the center 5 years ago, and now we are partnering with all global organizations, including World Economic Forum, including with Interpol. With Interpol, we are cooperating on the AI for law enforcement. It's a unique platform which we created 3 years ago, and conducting global summits and bringing together all law enforcement agencies all over the world. First 2 big summits were conducted in Singapore. Next one will be held in The Hague, but we will do it virtually, still sort of out from The Hague in November 2020. And one of the biggest deliverables there will be a creation of a global toolkit for the use of AI for law enforcement. That would be a launch of the toolkit. That would be a process how AI and robotics could be used by the law enforcement in a responsible manner. We are now partnering with the countries, also with the European Commission, to have a 2-year sort of a lengthy process to develop such a toolkit, which will assist and help countries to use this technology for good in a responsible manner, in a human rights compliant manner. Because as you agree, AI can help and do many things in the law enforcement. It can identify missing children, for example, using face recognition. It can detect fraudulent bank transitions and cyber attacks, or AI can improve law enforcement operational services and resource mobilization. Now, on the face recognition, and you rightly pointed out, there is a lot of debate on the surveillance technology, sort of a lot of discussions happening. Now, just a very sort of a short overview. Recent study shows that out of 194 countries, Mark, 98 are using face recognition globally. 12 have approved but not implemented, and 13 are considering the technology. Only 3 countries banned it, and there is no evidence about the 68 countries which are remaining. Only Belgium and Luxembourg in Europe oppose openly the use of face recognition technology officially. In the Middle East, Central Asia, facial recognition technology is widespread in the region, and notably for the military purposes, other purposes as well. In East Asia and Oceania, contact tracing has been used, and biometric identification became a common tool to slow the COVID infection rates in the countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. Now, publicly, the big developments were that IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft, in different forms and shapes, proposed moratorium or banning of the technology, or sort of before it's been legislated, and the US Democratic lawmakers have introduced the Face Recognition and Biometric Technology Moratorium Act as a bill already. Now, from our side at the United Nations Secretary General, and I fully share the view on his call for action for the human rights, states that advances in artificial intelligence related technologies, such as face recognition, software, and digital identification, must not be used to erode human rights, deepen inequalities, or exacerbate existing discrimination. In that sense, my center, we started to partner up with the World Economic Forum on this issue in regards to the design and implementation of a pilot project and several projects to test the World Economic Forum's policy framework on the limits to the responsible use of face recognition technology in domains of safety and security. And we're working now closely with the Netherlands police or other organizations to start pilot projects in that sense.
A whole story. Again, we will come back, I promise, with additional questions to Irakli, but I want to go to another colleague of ours on this call who represents a great American telecommunications company, Verizon. And Chris Novak is a cybersecurity guru, an expert in every sense. And I would like Chris to give us an overview of the cybersecurity market related to artificial intelligence, and specifically during the age of the COVID-19. More specifically, I want to ask you some questions that you could weave in your response. What are some of the major cybersecurity threats that are associated with artificial intelligence that you're currently seeing at Verizon today? Have those threats become more clear with the rollout of the 5G? And how does 5G and artificial intelligence relate to the national security threats?
Sure. Yeah, excellent questions there, and it's a lot packed into that. I'd say that when we look at the cybersecurity threat landscape, specifically as it relates to AI, some of the areas where we're seeing threat actors actually leverage it, and there was kind of a big debate early on as to whether or not we'd even see that happening, but areas where we're starting to see that happening is in trying to defeat things like CAPTCHAs or various forms of multi-factor authentication, leveraging AI in a malicious manner to try to circumvent those, or also leveraging it for things like bypassing message filtering. So, when we look at the threat landscape, we see a lot of activity related to social engineering attacks. A lot of that comes in typically via email or text messages. And so by leveraging AI, they're trying to find creative ways of getting messages past various security filtering systems and onto their intended targets. Another area where we're also seeing some of those threats starting to materialize is in the area of things like password cracking. Leveraging AI in order to figure out this is how humans typically behave. This is how people are often creating their passwords when they're asked to create a password that meets a certain complexity requirement. This is how most people think. If we can formulate that into an AI-based algorithm leveraging large amounts of data, the threat actors actually are able to get more efficient, effective, and faster at cracking what some of those passwords may be and actually being able to gain access to various systems. But also on the flip side of that, I'd say that there's a lot that we've done to improve on the defensive side of things. So it's not just about what is it the threat actors might be doing, but I honestly think there's a nearly infinite amount of possibilities of what we can be doing on the defensive side and leveraging big data, leveraging threat intelligence in combination with things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to pick up on the patterns that the threat actors do. Because keep in mind, most of these things are originating from people in the end, and people have certain behaviors and patterns that are recognizable, detectable. And when we have a large enough data set to look at, in many cases, some of those behaviors really start to become visible. And you mentioned 5G and how that affects things and how that plays into the national security landscape. I'd say that communications infrastructure has long been a critical piece of our national infrastructure. In fact, many in the telecom space would probably say that they are considered U.S. critical infrastructure and the equivalents abroad. As a result of that, I'd say the U.S. and most nations are understandably taking positions on how those 5G rollouts should happen and how various companies and equipment takes part in that, and what's allowed and what's not, and how does that fit into a bigger national security agenda or strategy. And obviously at Verizon, that's something we take very seriously. We follow all the regulations and laws about who and who we can't partner with and what technologies we can leverage in our network. And we know a lot of US allies are doing the same thing. And when we look at our 5G rollout in particular, right now, just in the middle of the pandemic, Verizon announced early on in that process that we were actually making, maybe counter to what some people would think, but we're actually making larger than expected investments in our 5G rollout during the pandemic. Not that it's easy, it's actually a challenge. But at the same time, we also recognize that things like a 5G network are enabling first responders and all sorts of others in ways, and that the communications infrastructure is being leaned on more heavily as people are, all across the world, all across the country, working from home, schooling from home, and leaning more heavily on that networking capability. And we're seeing a lot of first responder activity as it relates to the AI side of things also fit into that. For example, Verizon created a 5G first responder lab to be able to specifically test new and better technologies that we can put in the hands of police, firefighters, and other emergency service workers in order to better their abilities to respond and reduce their risk. For example, you may have even seen some of the television ads that we ran where it actually showed firefighters that had augmented reality goggles that they would wear when they go into a fire. And those goggles would be able to see things that the human eye can't see, feed that back to a system that could then process those images based on what it knows, and then feed back an augmented view to the firefighter who might otherwise not be able to see through the smoke and the flames and actually be able to identify, hey, there's a hazard there, let me stay away from that. Or there's a likely victim over there that I can't see or hear with the naked eye, but the goggles tell me there's someone over there that I need to go help. And so that's a great new way that I think that's playing a role, both the AI, the VR, and 5G coming together.
Thank you very much, Chris. You could see Chris is very inspired by a lot of the technology, which is driving driving a lot of the work in 5G and telecommunications. And I want to go to Matthew and Erin for additional conversations regarding artificial intelligence, get their view. But before I go there, Chris, you're not off the hook yet. I have one question for you right now. And the question is, you haven't mentioned Verizon supporting and investing into AI-focused companies. I read that Verizon invested and supported several AI companies for first responders that were actually delivered via 5G, giving them tools they need for public safety solutions on 5G. And also a lot of other things for developers and data analysts. Maybe you could comment on a few things that Verizon has provided in terms of tools and worked with several interesting AI-focused companies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We've done a lot in that space to invest, and I think you'll see a lot more to come in that space. And in particular, we talk a lot about COVID. There's a lot that we've done specifically to integrate that with our COVID response. You may have seen that Forbes actually ranked Verizon as #1 in the nation as it relates to employers' response to the pandemic. And a lot of what we've tried to do in that, not just how we handle our work and how we handle employees, but also, we created tools and working with other organizations. For example, Verizon Media's Yahoo Knowledge Graph is one area where, one of the largest organized collections of information in the world. And that Yahoo Knowledge COVID-19 data repository actually includes, a wide range of variables such as cases, deaths, recoveries, broken down at a county by county level. And we're working with a lot of those organizations that you mentioned in order to be able to take that data set, combine it with real science, and be able to effectuate positive outcomes in more real time. Another thing that we also are working on is an API that was built by the Verizon Media Big Data Platforms team. And that API actually allows developers to more easily navigate and transform those data sets to produce apps and visualization. So for example, medical researchers could build a timeline graphic to illustrate confirmed cases or the flattening of the curve in a specific county, or to measure the effect of things like social distancing over time. And then also there's a dashboard that we had been working on that leverages the similar elements of those data sets and able to create an interactive map to help people learn about the spread of the virus, and then what it is that both medical, healthcare, and other researchers in the AI world can leverage that data in order to say, how can we bring to market or bring to bear faster capabilities as it relates to things like a vaccine or a cure.
Thank you very much, Chris. Those are great examples. And with that, I want to go to Matthew. Matthew, you represent another great American company where the lifeblood of your company is R&D, it's innovation. I wanted to ask for your remark on where we are in terms of artificial intelligence addressing the issues of national security. But I also want to build in and embed several questions in the interest of time. Maybe for you to give us a perspective of what is military artificial intelligence market look like, kind of build a roadmap for all of our audience so they understand. And maybe also if you could talk about, since R&D is a lifeblood of Lockheed Martin, can you share some interesting solutions and startups that you are teaming up or you're seeing or collaborating with across the world, in Silicon Valley, in Europe, in Israel, in Australia, and Saudi Arabia? And, how does it fit in with the overall roadmap? I know Deborah mentioned quantum and hypersonic and space systems and AI. Give us a broad perspective and from your position in Lockheed Martin.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate on the panel. I think it's great. A lot of good discussion so far. One of the things I think from a broad level that Mark Beale mentioned from the JAIC was the importance of DARPA in really setting the stage for Silicon Valley to advance the state of the art in AI. And they continue to do that to this day. So I think when we look at AI, we need to look at it in general in waves, which is what DARPA has laid out, right? That we're really trying today to apply capabilities that have been developed in what we call the second wave, right? Which is your deep neural networks, and trying to apply them and generate value from what we've got today there. The next step in that, and this is really aligned to your R&D question, is in third wave AI, really where you're trying to look at contextual reasoning and remove the brittleness from today's AI. So instead of having an algorithm that may be focused on solving a problem like Go, that it could actually explain why it's making the decisions that it's making, and also reason about things, so that if you change a couple of pixels, instead of showing a giraffe and tricking it into thinking that it's a gorilla, you would actually, like a human does, look and say it's obviously still a giraffe. But you really need that contextual understanding and reasoning to understand that, hey, it's got a long neck, it's orange, and the pixel change in the corner has no impact on really what the question you're being asked. So, the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, or the AAAI, their recent AI magazine was focused on DARPA's impact on artificial intelligence. So I would recommend that your audience pick up a copy and take a read. It's very, very interesting to read through what DARPA's impact has had on AI. And I think that gives a really good roadmap for where we need to head in that direction. And so you see the JAIC is very focused on applying AI to solve problems today, and DARPA is really looking at what comes next. And I think that's a really great way to look at it. And you know, Lockheed Martin is taking a similar type of approach. To address some of your other questions, I think that the landscape that we're looking at really has two aspects. And like all companies, what can we do to leverage AI to do the things that we do better? So back office type of things, right? How do we manufacture better? How do we secure our supply chain? How do we do better cybersecurity in general? How do we do things more efficiently so that we can pass on those savings to our customers? And so we're looking at that. I think the aspect that a lot of people focus on is really, you know, on the battle space itself. And I think I think the challenge is with so much information on the modern battle space. If you think of the communications that are going on amongst lots of different platforms and the complex environment, you think about radar and all the types of data that may be passed around on the modern battle space. It's only becoming more complex, and decisions need to be made in a much shorter time span. So you think that when decisions were being made in the minutes, humans could keep up. A lot of information, but humans could keep up. In the future, with the 5 domains on the modern battle space, decisions need to be made on a nanosecond level. So just to give you a feel for what that really means is 1 nanosecond to a second is the same or equivalent of 1 second to 32 years or 31.7 years. Wow. So, you know, thinking of the modern battle space and asking a human to make a decision at the nanosecond level is just unfair. And so AI is absolutely necessary to help provide aids to humans on the modern battle space to be able to make decisions faster and more rapidly, more accurately. And I think that's a very, very good thing. And so when we focus on applying AI in those domains, and you look at all the different domains like ISR, EW, predictive maintenance, it all comes down to leveraging AI in an efficient way to help humans do what they need to do. And then the last point I'll make is that what becomes incredibly important on the battle space when you apply AI is making sure that you have robust solutions that you can verify and validate. And so, so there's a whole bunch of things that we need to do, like having humans train with AI algorithms to learn to trust them, but also make sure that, you know, there's a difference between doing AI in a lab and doing AI out in the real world. And that's not just on the battle space, that's everywhere. Yeah. And so we're seeing that, you know, in lots of different things. But, you know, on the battle space, when you have to make a tough decision, you need to make sure you can trust the tools that are at your disposal. And AI and the algorithms, we need to make sure they're robust. We need to make sure that the approaches can generalize well, that they're protected, that they're, you know, and so some of the investments that we've made are in companies like Darwin Ai, which we announced publicly, Mythic, which is a hardware company. We have an LM Ventures firm based out in Silicon Valley. And so, you know, we're partnering with companies around the world. Darwin is from Canada. We've got a research lab down in Australia, which is where I'm from originally, working with groups in Israel, working with groups in Saudi Arabia. And so there's a lot of great ideas out there, and how we bring those together. You know, we're leveraging our LM Ventures group to really make those seed investments in important areas. And I think explainability and defensibility of algorithms is one of the most important areas where we can invest today.
Thank you, Matthew. We probably have a lot more questions. I do want to ask before I go to Nikolai, and I will go to Nikolai right now, so Nikolai could have a short dialogue with Erin, some of the cyber issues in Silicon Valley. But before we do this, Matthew, I have a question that probably you may not be able to answer on behalf of Lockheed Martin, but maybe your personal opinion. I know one of the books that you referenced is AI Superpowers, China, Silicon Valley, and the New World Order. For those of you that haven't picked up this book, please pick this book up. I believe you referred to this book in some of your conversation. What does this tell us about the U.S. leadership versus China?
Yeah, and I think this was a topic that was talked about at the beginning of our discussion today. You know, it was a fascinating book to read through. It certainly opened up my eyes about the Chinese culture and how the Lee Sedol moment with Go and having DeepMind beat Lee Sedol was really the moonshot example to China as it was to the US, and really inspired China as a nation to go all in on AI. And just one of the little things that I remember is reading how parents in China used to push their children to become doctors and lawyers and, you know, very prestigious, jobs. And now they've pivoted so much, and AI is such a part of their society that they're pushing their children to go into a career in AI. And I think that gets to the heart of the issue, which is that I think China, from a government perspective, a commercial perspective, it really is all in on trying to become the leader. I think by 2030 is their stated goal. The one thing I would say, and of course that's concerning. I think anytime you have a government that's willing to leverage AI against their citizens, I think that's a concern. But I think the thing we have to remember is, you know, although when you look at statistics, like numbers of papers produced to go to leading conferences, you look at where the breakthroughs are really happening, and that is still in Silicon Valley, and that is still in the United States. And so, you know, as much as we certainly need to position ourselves better, I think, to be able to compete globally, I think that, you know, we have a lot to be incredibly proud of. And I'm not just talking about the work that, say, Lockheed does, or as one of your guests is from Verizon, but I think, you know, entirely in our ecosystem, I do think we have a pretty phenomenal ecosystem. And I do think a lot of the advances are coming from here. And, you know, I don't want to overlook that. So I don't want to overstate the problem of China. I do believe that they will be a serious competitor to the United States and our allies moving forward. But I think it's something that we need to look at doing what we've done before better. And really, it'd be great if we went all in like we did when we went to the moon. I think that's really the type of levels of investment, and you know, make this not about politics, but make it about unifying the country. I think there's a great opportunity there.
I agree with you, Matthew. I think this is one of the takeaways, is that every country, but more important, as Deborah mentioned in the beginning of the call, we need moonlight initiatives, like what we have done going to the moon and other initiatives. And those initiatives will spark innovation from the leading corporations and startups and venture capital, where Nikolai is sitting, and all of our allies and our members of the government. And I think those moonshot projects, especially in the area of AI, are so critical. And with this in mind, Nikolai, I'm going to you for you to have a discussion with Erin, who is coming, was originally spent a significant amount of time with Homeland Security, knows all the issues related to protecting our nation, and she is now one of the thought leaders in cybersecurity and AI. So, Nikolai.
Thank you, Mark. And first, I want to tie into what you mentioned, Mark, that Deborah brought up. I think it's crucial for the industry that I represent, venture capital, to actually work on these really hard problems, right? That our society faces. And I think the national security aspect of this is something that's very interesting. One of very important problem, but there also needs to be a lot of collaboration, like we've seen historically with Silicon Valley and the venture capital ecosystem. So Erin, I would love for you to share first a little bit about your background, some of the things you're working on right now, and then some of the exciting things you did at the Department of Homeland Security, which ties into this collaboration with venture and the tech community. I remember you were sharing a lot of those last year at our conference. So it would be great to hear a little bit about that, and then we'll dig into some more specific topics and questions around what's happening today with COVID and the world.
Sure. Thanks, Nikolai. Thanks for having me. Starting with my my DHS position, it was an interesting position to be in. Not a lot of people realize what we did, and so I was a portfolio manager in the cybersecurity division within the Science and Technology Directorate. We were the functional equivalent of a VC within the government. Pretty small organization, but what we did was we provided support for government operations as well as the larger Homeland Security enterprise. So the nature of our operations is we work with government entities, try and figure out where they had capability gaps. If there was a solution in the marketplace, we would point them in the right direction and step aside. But where we really excelled is identifying where there was, too costly of a solution in the marketplace or a gap, and then basically bankrolling the applied research, advanced development of those solutions. I owned 3 programs within our division. We funded along kind of, depending on how you count, 12 to 14 dimensions of cybersecurity. So I had cyber risk economics, data infrastructure, and data privacy. Very interesting. I see what's going on in the current state of affairs, and I know comments have been made previously by my colleagues with regard to the need for R&D funding. I can't overstate the importance of research and data infrastructure as an enablement to AI, to technology innovation, to responsible innovation. Fast forwarding to my current position, which is the Director of Cyber Risk Analytics at a company called Guidewire-Cyence. We essentially take a macroscopic view of cyber risk, and we undertake data measurements and analytics and financial modeling of that cyber risk, primarily for the insurance industry as well as for the financial services industry.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Erin. I just want to step in here and ask some questions quickly to all our participants. First, I want to start off with you, Deborah, who joins us on the call today. How do we innovate America for all Americans, and how do we include AI as a basis of this innovation post-COVID-19 world? I want to hear this from you. I'm very interested to hear your take.
This whole question of how we expand the base and scope of the innovators in the United States is been one that the Council on Competitiveness has been focusing on for a long time through our Innovation Frontiers initiative in partnership with the National Science Foundation. I mentioned, using the strategy and tools and understanding of what really created our great centers of innovation and how that's a baseline for expanding these capabilities into other parts of the country is obviously one thing to start with. But I do think we need to see a much deeper knitting together of our community colleges, with our liberal arts colleges, with our public and private great research universities, including also our historically Black colleges and universities, such as Howard Universities and others that have played a very, very important role since their establishment. And they don't get the attention and importance that they deserve. But at the end of the day, we have an extremely failing K through 12 system, and we all know that, and it's particularly failed in our inner cities, in spite of billions of dollars being poured into these institutions. There has to be radical reform that includes issues around teaching and the teachers' unions. Anybody that's interested in this topic, look at what former Mayor Rahm Emanuel tried to do in Chicago to increase the teaching day by just a few hours for extracurricular programs for children in disadvantaged environments. And the whole union exploded on that, and he really lost his political position by not having support of that union. These are systemic issues that go way beyond technology, beyond innovation, beyond investments in R&D, et cetera, et cetera. They're both cultural, governance, and societal issues, and we need to come together to begin to solve these and use the tools and thinking of innovation to address them, and not just continue the way we have now for many years with failing systems. People often say, well, how could we ever compete with China? They have so many more people, a pool of innovators. Well, we're not utilizing really almost a third of our population. And the example I gave yesterday in my testimony, and I was very pleased that Nobel Prize winner Paul Romer brought it up and endorsed it, as did others. Let's look at how our military academies recruit potential candidates. They follow very closely the demographics of our nation. And they start identifying in middle school young people from all races, all background that have some potential acumen, and they start mentoring them just the way sports teams begin to identify children that have potential talent in baseball or football, whatever it is. And they nurture them and they follow. We do not do that as a rule, and universities certainly don't. And by the time young people are ready for applications to universities and to go into these STEM fields, they're kind of left alone. And the traditional model as well, I'm just throwing out a number, there are 300 students in an entry chemistry course, and the professor, or really now the teaching assistant, says, and we'll weed out 3/4 of them by the end of the year. The military academies do the exact opposite. They have programs that mentor and monitor each midshipman and woman throughout the 4 years. So they have the highest rates in the entire country of retention and 4-year graduation. So we have a huge responsibility in this country now to focus on all of our people. And as I said in my opening remarks, that does not mean that we don't want to change our immigration laws so that we can keep the best and brightest that come here and study. But I will not mention the university. It's one of our elite universities, and a friend of mine is the dean of one of their colleges. And she's told me for 4 years that 80% of all her students are from China because there aren't any qualified Americans. And I just put a challenge on her. I said, within 5 years, how many of those students can be African Americans? So we have to be very bold and brave and change the way we're doing things, because not only is it an issue of inequity and injustice, but it's a huge drag on our innovation future by not involving all Americans to the utmost possibility to participate in the innovation future of our nation. So you can tell I'm very passionate about it. I'm obviously a woman. I started my career when there were very few women in the work I'm in. And I believe that we all have responsibilities, not just in the US, but in all the countries around the world. And I very much applaud my colleague from Saudi Arabia with her leadership and what she's doing, and others that have spoke to this today.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deborah. Next, I want to go to Mark Beale. Mark, you recently said it is important to work with industry to advance the use of AI, stating that AI is not necessarily of core prominence in our organization. So as a result, we need to begin to look externally to industry to teach us how to use this technology and use it responsibly. And you also explained the Pentagon's decision to start with an AI strategy and the need for the department to change its culture by treating data as a strategic asset. Would you mind expanding on this for us?
Hey, yeah, sure. Thanks for the question. I guess in the first instance, I just refer to a comment I made earlier, this sort of dichotomy of DoD's engagement with this technology. On one hand, we've had tremendous success as first movers in shaping the evolution of this technology, and in many instances creating it. On the other hand, the digital transformation that a lot of digital native companies like Google sort of embraced naturally is something that's a little bit unusual for us. And so driving AI into operations, adopting it at scale, these are areas I think that are a little challenging, and we have to look externally to the industry best in class who have proven out their ability to do these kinds of things. And so, with that in mind, you can even going back to the way we were established as an organization. We were, codified in law as a DoD back in 1947, this law called the National Security Act. And over the last 70 years, really the only major changes to that law, and there have been maybe one or two, have basically added more organizations, more bureaucracy on top of that. At the fundamental level, if you were to design the national security enterprise for the digital age, I'm not quite sure it would look like the organization that we have today, in which we have a number of sort of sub-organizations, each empowered with a tremendous amount of authority and a congressional constituency that undermines and disincentivizes the very things that we need in place to sort of enable AI adoption at scale. Things like data sharing across DoD components, extremely complex. And that leads into this other piece of how do you treat data as an asset? I think for, over the last 18 months, as I've been with the JAIC, I've seen a tremendous swing in DoD on this very topic. I mean, Mr. Deasy, the current DoD CIO, has brought a tremendous amount of energy and experience in the digital modernization. We've recently hired a new chief data officer out of United States Special Operations Command, Mr. David Spirk. He's coming in, and you can see all the right signals and all the right pieces being put into place that actually begin to treat this data that we have. And by the way, it's very formidable. In many cases, sometimes we see DoD treats the data like it exhaust fumes, right, coming out of the back of the aircraft. I think that was true 5 years ago. I don't think that's true today. I think today everyone recognizes the power and capability that our data has, especially our war-fighting data. And just the last point I'll make, everyone talks about sort of the Chinese advantage in certain applications. I should kind of reject that that notion. I think for the United States, we have the Constitution at the center of things. We have our privacy laws, and as a result, we don't build the types of applications that China builds. We don't collect the kinds of data that China collects. But that said, we do collect data about DoD systems and military operations and military activities and maintenance data and so forth. And we have a tremendous amount of capability and promise in that data set. And I think the transition from industrial age to digital age is well underway in the department. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. Next, I want to move on to Deemah for the next question. Deemah, I wanted to ask you, what do you think the post-COVID world will look like from the economic, geopolitical, societal, and technological side? So this is what I wanted to ask you. I'm really curious to hear your insights.
I've been always saying it's life before COVID is going to be different than life after COVID, definitely. Although definitely we have got a very big hit when it comes to the economical impact as well as the social impact that we have to deal with, I do see it a time of opportunity. With each challenge comes an opportunity, and I think this is where COVID boosts the adoption of digital transformation. Now there is we have been facing a lot of challenges for societies and nations to adopt digital transformation. Now it's a must, where every individual has to start learning how to either use or consume and also produce digital technologies. When we come to private sectors and government, before digital transformation was a nice to have. They didn't take it as seriously. Now it's a must, and they for them to sustain and for them to rectify whatever COVID-19 has done from an economic and social impact. Digital transformation will help them to do that. So now it's a must, it's a demand, and now it's just a matter of the speed and time that it will take them to transform. We have seen a lot of businesses that have went out of business because they did not adopt to digital transformation. Also, we see that a lot of governments and private sector have not given data the right focus and creating data strategies on how to utilize the data to make it efficient spending and to innovate and come up with new innovations. I think that is going to change going forward. There's going to be more demand on how to create these digital data strategies. So one point that I see that it should be looked at, and it is an opportunity, and I think Nicole, I think if I pronounced the name right, would agree to this, is looking at disrupting business models using corporate venture builders. How can we utilize these assets that are in government and private sector and create new innovations and ventures rather than increasing the capex and opex of a company or a government, reducing them by disrupting the business models and utilizing these assets to build new ventures and contribute to the digital economy. When we come to disruptive innovations, I think it's time for us to look at before we were looking at AI as in terms of manufacturing, in terms of some industries. I think now it's cross-cutting all industries, and we have to look at it from really as a tool that will help and support in building our economy going forward. Education, for instance, it's not enough to throw in an LMS in front of a teacher or a student for them just to continue learning. Learning is more than that. It's communication, it's skills, it's collaboration, and how are we going to utilize these great cutting-edge technologies like VR and AR and AI to understand this new era of learning, for instance, or the era of logistics and so on. So I'm really optimistic, and I think this is a time of opportunity for any digital transformation experts specifically. And I think now, since Saudi is leading or hosting the G20, we have seen that focus and these messages from a lot of the working groups like the B20, looking at the effect of COVID-19 on the business, on private sector, Women 20, looking at the effect of COVID from a digital perspective, and how, and also from the Digital Economy Task Force. All of them are looking at the digital transformation is the way to go, and it is the answer for the challenges coming ahead, and therefore they have agreed to a multi-trillion fund funded by the G20 to support in either digital connectivity, also when it comes to funding innovation and digital innovation, enablement of the enablement of the use of cutting-edge technology, and also policy and regulation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Deemah, for showcasing Saudi leadership. And from here, I want to move on to Irakli for the next question. Facial recognition and surveillance adoption have been hit hard and have been banned in countries and by large technology companies as well. Can you provide for us, Irakli, insights about the global landscape for facial recognition and surveillance?
Yes, thank you, Angelica. I think I did cover most of it actually in my sort of introduction. If you want to ask me something else, that's fine. If not, I can sort of elaborate further on that.
Yeah, absolutely, Irakli. You did cover if you want to augment, but we would like to also focus on the recently released policy of the United Nations Secretary General Roadmap for Digital Cooperation. If you could make some comments, please.
Yes, thank you very much. This is a very important document, Mark. This is a roadmap for advancing a safer, more equitable digital world, one which will lead to a brighter and more prosperous future for all. And I want to underline that the position of the United Nations is that the benefit of AI should be sort of across the globe and as wider as possible to everyone rather than selected few. And this will benefit actually all, and the danger of digital divide is certainly there if countries will not be benefiting. And that's why this roadmap is there. This was a big work and recommendation of the Secretary General's high-level panel for digital cooperation, which was chaired by Melinda Gates and Jack Ma, and a lot of other organizations were participating in a roundtable discussions with key stakeholders which formed the roadmap, and we were part of this as well. Governments, private sector, civil society, international organizations, academia, technical community took part in the deliberations of the creation of the roadmap. Roadmap has 8 key areas for action. And they are achieving universal connectivity by 2030, promoting digital public goods to create a more equitable world, ensuring digital inclusion for all, including the most vulnerable, strengthening digital capacity building, ensuring the protection of human rights in the digital era, supporting global cooperation on artificial intelligence, as well as promoting trust and security in the digital environment, and building a more effective architecture for digital cooperation. And from our point of view, certainly we're very much involved in the deliberations of action number 3, which is worth noting, is to enhancing multi-stakeholder efforts on global AI cooperation, which is needed to help build global capacity for the development and use of AI in a manner that is trustworthy, human rights-based, safe and sustainable, and promotes peace.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Irakli. Now moving on to Matt from Lockheed Martin. So I wanted to ask you, Lockheed strives to apply ethical standards when adopting new technology because customers are counting on us to collaborate and to strengthen public trust. So you emphasize the importance of ensuring integration of safety principles into AI technology projects, and that it is important to build human and machine trust. Can you discuss this for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they referred to the importance of developing robust solutions. What we can't afford to do is to deploy a solution or an algorithm that doesn't at least behave the way that we expect it to, or that we can't fully understand what it will do. And so if you think of a human pilot, for example, we train a human, which is non-deterministic, very, very aggressively to make sure that their behavior is as deterministic as possible, right? We try to remove out the probability that one pilot will do something completely different to another. And I think that's really where we're getting to with deep neural networks, is we need to be able to understand what's happening there. And so that's why we're investing in partnerships with companies that really know how to do this well. And I think there's a couple of levels. There's one at the algorithm level, which gets a lot of attention, right? How do you explain what the algorithm is doing? But there's also another way to look at this, which is at the system level. Really what we care about is how the system is behaving. And the way to get there may be multiple algorithms, hybrid approaches. And some of these approaches, for example, combining symbolic AI with deep neural networks, is more explainable than some of the approaches we've taken to date. So I think that's one. And then the last piece I'd say is that having algorithms integrate with humans while they're training to perform a particular mission is critical to building trust. And that's how you get that human-machine teaming to be efficient. One of the books that I'd read was Gary Kasparov's Deep Thinking. And in that, he explains that grandmasters teamed up with AI algorithms were less effective than, say, more average chess players teamed up with AI algorithms. And the reason is that grandmasters are so confident that they second guess what the algorithm is telling them to do. And I think that's a problem we would have today if, say, a human pilot was teamed up with AI algorithms, because the human pilots are experts and have been trained a particular way, versus a future state where the pilot will train with an algorithm and become much more effective. And so I think there's a lot that we need to do here in training humans to interact more effectively with AI algorithms.
Thank you very much, Matt. As you're discussing humans and digital, I'll just venture to say, as we're coming down to a closure, and I'll ask everyone to stay for an extra 10 minutes so we could do closing statements as we are recording this conversation. It's critically important. We want to have action items, and we want to have call to action from everyone on this call, to our audiences, to the governments, to the CEOs of companies, to the chief digital officers. So your call to action here would be critically important. So stay with us for another 10 minutes. But before we do this, I want to make a point here that it's all national security is about planning ahead. It's about forecasting. It's about resilience. And yet we made some mistakes in countries, and including in the United States, but we're learning that national security, healthcare, combined with areas of social innovation and digital transformation, as Irakli mentioned, the UN SDG goals are so important for humanity. It's so important to protect our supply chains. It's critically important to make our countries resilient, especially here in the United States. And we have to try to do better. What we have done in the past based on human engineering and human skills, but as Matthew mentioned and as Beale mentioned to us, we have to add additional machine digital element to make sure that we protect safely our citizens, our civil society, and everything that we stand for in our democracies in our countries. So just keep this in mind, and I'm glad that we're having this global conversation discussing policy techniques on making sure that our national security is complemented with artificial intelligence. Because remember, for this audience, digital economy is now gearing up to be the largest economy in the world. If everything goes right, and according to McKinsey and BCG and all other great companies, we're looking at $17 to $18 trillion created by artificial intelligence, not only globally, which means creation of jobs, business opportunities. We see companies like Zoom exponentially having the bigger market than many traditional companies in transportation and other places. So we have to pay attention. With this in mind, I'm passing this on to my colleague Nikolai, who's been waiting patiently there in the Silicon Valley, or representing Silicon Valley, to have a closing statement together with Erin, and then we will jump to everybody on this conference call, on this webinar, to have a closing and action items that we need to really adhere and the call to action. Go ahead, Nikolai.
Thank you, Mark. So tying into what you just said, Erin, more specifically, some of the things you work over the years and working on right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about cybercrime and how you've been working to make the society more secure. And how has that evolved now with COVID-19, or rather, what are the threats we've seen? Has the threat vectors increased, or what are the things to think about, and how can we prepare for the future to make sure that America Inc. or all the businesses that make up, what we do are safe and secure in our personal lives, of course?
Yeah, so a couple of things with regard to the cybercrime and AI nexus. I think Chris spoke well to forthcoming technologies and techniques and strategies and whatnot. On the immediate front, the causes of the susceptibility to cyber risk that are owing to the COVID-19, workforce, or work from home and remote workforce, which is to say an expanded threat and vulnerability canvas. That frankly, they're owing to a failure of basic blocking and tackling from a cybersecurity perspective. So things like VPNs and multi-factor authentication, segmenting your networks, kind of the boring stuff. I think that's sort of the unsexy spoiler alert there. There's no real AI nexus in that near term. Similar to the aftermath of natural disasters, that often breed scammers and fraudsters, I think C-19 has attracted these opportunistic cyber criminals. And that's what we're seeing going on. We're hearing tons of reports on attacks, and I do believe that's occurring. The question is, are those attacks culminating in actual attacks with losses? And I think that's, or I should say incidents with losses, and that's sort of a TBD. The bigger question to kind of tie this back to the AI nexus is, how can AI facilitate this basic blocking and tackling that we're still failing at, right? So like 80% of incidents and attacks are owing to the known knowns, right? So this is not rocket science here that we're dealing with. How can we enable or engage AI through, RPA or otherwise to automate a lot of these tasks? That raises the question of, well, how do we actually trust the automation, right? People aren't just automatically going to allow a machine to make decisions and take actions without that trust. And I think some of those substrates for trust, I may have mentioned in my brief remarks earlier, is a solid R&D infrastructure, data infrastructure. There's this assumption that good quality labeled training data to train and develop and evaluate our AI system just sort of grows on trees and drops down from heaven, and it doesn't. I can tell you that it requires funding, and there are very few entities that are funding those types of enablements. Some of those other substrates for trusted AI, I think, are ethics and governance as well. To the notion of, how do we sort of future-proof cybercrime and cyber risk uncertainty? I'll throw out two dimensions. One, I'll just plant a thought for folks to think about here is bioweapons, right? So we have our hands full right now with this current natural threat, but think about when using AI, our genetic information will be weaponized, and it's coming, right? So think about drugs or disease agents, these designer pathogens that are genetically engineered to only target individuals with specific genetics that are not shared by the attackers. So you can imagine a situation where a nation state group could design a pathogen so that they're naturally resistant while other groups or ethnicities or whatnot are naturally vulnerable. And then the last point I'll just make real briefly on future proofing is, I think technology will continue to drive cybercrime innovation for the bad guys as well as the good guys. This current trend towards automating cybercrime execution tasks, it's going to allow the attackers to focus on strategy, and that's going to result in higher quality and higher volume targeting. So the bottom line is, I think technology is raising the cyber peril cat and mouse game to the power of AI and data science.
Erin, we appreciate your comments. I want to go now to the final closing statements, and I want to start with Mark Beale. The statements that you could make, the call to action regarding AI and national security. What do you think the ecosystem needs to do now without any delay?
Thanks, Mark, and I really appreciated the dialogue today and learning from all of you folks. What's the call to action? I think there are three. The first, we need to resist this idea that there's some kind of moral equivalency between the United States and our strategic competitors. There is this notion out there in the world that technology ethics is somehow new, it's fundamentally different, and all the old things that we had in place need to be thrown out and we need to start over. I reject that premise. The United States Constitution is a masterpiece of practical statecraft. It is our primary strategic differentiator. And to all of our partners and our allies and our competitors out there, the ends of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness at the end of the day are what make the US government different, despite all of its imperfections. That's the first thing. No moral equivalency in this space. The second thing, for US and allied industry, I think my call to you would be to sort of think about your own geopolitical due diligence. Think about your own values. Think about how the technologies that you may be thinking about selling all around the world will be deployed in the context in which you're selling them, and think about whether that aligns with, the values that we all share together. And then lastly, I would say there's a war on talent, and we need you. We need industry. We need intelligent people, like-minded people. We have very difficult problems in the national security space to solve. We have data that can't be found anywhere else. From an engineering perspective, this is like a dream. And we need young people to get engaged with the government, to shape the direction that we're going, and to help us assure, sort of a united democratic vision for the 21st century in the digital age. So those are my three calls to action. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark. We'll go now to Deborah Vin Smith for the call to action and closing of this program, and then Irakli to you from the international perspective. Deborah, especially with the National Commission focusing on recommendation of innovation pillars, the 9 innovation pillars, can you talk about the call to action that we need to have regarding the national security and AI and the threats that are coming from abroad like China?
Thank you. Well, first, let me just say, I think that my colleague, Mark, that just spoke before, really gave a very powerful, eloquent statement that I would endorse completely. So I will start with that and then add that from the perspective of the Council and our National Commission on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontiers, the concepts of investing in the critical technologies that will drive future productivity. We are in an era of low productivity growth, and that deliver inclusive prosperity and national security for our nation, as well as contribute to global growth and prosperity, are at the top of the list. AI is transformational in what it will enable humans to do in order to provide productivity, prosperity, and security. And we must double down, not just on our financial investments, but on the strategic partnerships that knit together our universities, our national labs, our large-scale corporations, as well as nurturing and advancing the dynamic startup world. Third, we need to very carefully and strategically collaborate with like-minded partners around the world, and particularly those that, as Mark has just said, share our values of openness, of democracy, of transparency, and trust. We are living in an era with a deficit of trust, and we saw this come forward so harshly with the COVID virus. And so as the digital transformation accelerates, we really need to work together with truth, trust, and transparency as the framework for collaboration. And also, of course, at the end of the day, we're talking about sustainability, adaptability, and resiliency. And the AI potential can really play a huge role in accomplishing all of these for the good of humanity in many, many ways now and into the future. So thank you, Mark, for your leadership in putting together this fabulous discussion with my colleagues here and around the world.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for this perspective of where we need to be in the United States on an increasingly complex world and what we need to do to really adhere to certain values, our values of democracy, our ethical values, and combine it with when we're building AI systems that will protect our citizens and our society. And with this in mind, the UN SDG goals that we're keeping in mind for this conversation, Irakli, and specifically some of your closing statements, your actions that you would like this community to take, keeping in mind that we have a lot of younger audience as well in this community.
Absolutely, Mark, and thanks a lot, and really enjoyed the conversation, really enjoyed the contributors to this dialogue, and learned a lot, and looking forward to the cooperation. Some of the points which I would like to sort of reiterate or underline again, number one is to fully understand the risks and benefits of this technology and make sure that the benefits of AI will be equally enjoyed by the wider world and not selected few. And to make sure and how to do it is to start thinking about the global governance of AI, and some of the actions would be to sort of put together some of the mechanisms how to create that global governance where the risks are understood, where the benefits are enjoyed by wider world. And the recently launched roadmap for the digital corporation of the Secretary General of the United Nations really provides the base for that, and really good multi-stakeholder cooperation approach to it. Now, another thing which I would like to reiterate, this is sort of more on the operational level, which I'm directly involved, is the creation of the toolkit for the use of AI by law enforcement. And in that, we really underline the responsible use of AI. That's the big issue, how law enforcement can use it at the same time, where the concerns about the human rights and civil liberties are real and very serious, and some of it can really undermine the fundamental principles of law, privilege against self-incrimination, proof beyond reasonable doubt, or damage public trust in the law enforcement. That's why we really sort of underline that AI used by law enforcement should enshrine general principles and respect of human rights, justice, democracy, rule of law, and requirements of fairness, accountability, transparency, and explainability. And that's why we are creating that toolkit, and want to call on everyone to join us and help us to create this mechanism where law enforcement can use the AI in responsible manner. This would stimulate positive potential to develop, deploy, and use AI in responsible manner. So thank you, Mark, again, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Irakli, for the international thoughts. We appreciate the community that we're building and converging this community with government policy, venture capital, entrepreneurship, startup, and more importantly, the younger generation, which is represented by our Gen Z leader, Angelica, and for the closing statements from her.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark. It was a true pleasure to have everybody here. It was really an honor to learn everybody's perspective on national security. And I, as a Gen Z leader and somebody who is pushing this movement in digitalization, I just want all of the young audience to know that the new national security is cybersecurity, and we need to be prepared. And we can't just be constantly on tandem online, doing various things without taking care of our digital footprint. We need to be educating ourselves on the importance of national security and cybersecurity, because we are the new generation that's going to be building this new digital infrastructure. So I encourage everybody, all the younger audience, to, once this is produced and released, to share this with every single young person that you know. We need to step up, as Mark said. We need to be able to build this new infrastructure that our nation is ushering out for this new digital economic era, and we're the ones who are going to be leading it. So national security is our imperative, and it is important for us to understand that right now, to align ourselves with SDG goals that Irakli just outlined. And again, it was a true pleasure to have all of you on the show today, and I'm very excited to sharing this and all of your thoughts with the younger audience and making sure that we take a stand and we lead this country in the right direction.